I suggested opening our relationship at a neighborhood park and involving them. This happened. Hello, Reddit. My name is June, and I'm 35 years old. I have been married to my husband for 11 years now, and we have 2 kids. I own a mini bakery where I sell my cakes and cupcakes to the town, which is a relatively small one where everyone knows who everyone else is. I'm here because I need some advice on something very important. It's Chris, my husband. He has decided to walk out of our marriage and is demanding that I give him full custody of the kids. It's actually my fault. I did something rather horrible, but I hadn't exactly been thinking then, and I had only joked about it. But Chris had taken it rather seriously. At a neighborhood party, I suggested opening our relationship and involving them. Then this had happened. Chris had gotten really angry, and he had decided to announce right there in front of everyone that he wanted a divorce because he had to get away from my cheating self. I had thought of it all as jokes until he had taken the kids and had left the house the next day after ignoring me through the rest of the night, and they've not been back since then. He emailed the divorce papers and won't even return any of my calls or even hear me out. I had suggested the whole thing because of what had been going on the past few months. Let me give a little backstory so you'd understand why I had brought up opening our relationship. I never went to university because my parents, despite trying their hardest, couldn't afford to send me to university. So after high school, instead of pursuing academics further, I decided to work part-time jobs. Not so I could help my parents with the bills, though. I wanted to be able to get the things my friends could get without having to work as I had to. My parents never asked for any of the money I worked for, though, which made it easier to spend that money on buying the things my parents couldn't afford to buy me. I decided to move away from home when I saved a little. Everyone knew me there, and I hated being there, especially during school breaks when most of my high school classmates would come home, and I was expected to smile and listen to them rant and talk about school. Soon, I was able to gather enough money to move, which I did, expecting things to be easier. But things had obviously not turned out the way I wanted them to be. I had to live with a girl I met the day I moved there in the small room she rented, and she demanded I pay her rent, which had been more than half of what she paid as the rent. But I had no choice but to endure. I got a job in a bakery, and it was very hard at first. I got yelled at several times by the boss because I couldn't get many things right, and eventually I got fired. I didn't want to give up and move back home, so I looked for another job, and that had been a job as a cleaner in a small guest house. Several times I would get harassed, especially by the male guests, and I resisted lots of attempts to be paid for sex. It was while working in the guest house I met Donald. Donald was very sweet and kind to me, and whenever I cleaned up his room, he would give me tips. I liked him a lot because of the fact that he never attempted to touch me or anything. Donald had asked for my story, and when I explained bits and bits to him, he decided to take me with him when he traveled back home, and I had been so excited. I told him that my parents were dead and I had no siblings, so he could really pity me and help me out. When Donald was leaving, he kept his promise, and he had taken me along with him. I was happy I got to live a new life, but what I did not know was Donald had intended to take advantage of me. Well, he didn't exactly take advantage of me, seeing that I had agreed to do what he wanted me to. Apparently, Donald owned a club where he employed sex workers, and he had told me that I could just be a waitress who would earn tips, and I didn't have to have sex with the clients if I was smart enough. I agreed to it, and soon I became one of the best seducing waitresses. I even offered men lap dances to get money, but I only slept with very few of them. I slept with men who I knew had lots of money and would give me lots when I got down with them. I wanted to gather enough money to learn baking and also get myself a mini shop for it. But the money I earned as tips was so much, I just couldn't stop. The money came in really easily and it just pleased me. I continued as a waitress in Donald's club for 2 years before I eventually decided to move away from that town completely with the ton of money I had made. Donald kicked against me leaving, but I knew it wasn't just because I was one of his best workers. It was because he actually was sleeping with me secretly. Donald was married, and I knew his wife very well. In fact, we were good friends, and she was always telling me everything. She did not know, though, that her husband and I were sleeping together. and it made me feel guilty doing that to her, so I moved away without letting Donald know where I was or where I moved to. I moved to a small town almost the same size as my hometown. Nobody knew me there as Zoe, my nickname in the club, or knew my dirty pasts. I got a small apartment, and I registered to become a certified baker. It was then I met my husband, Simon. Simon is my instructor's brother, and he owned a farm which he commercialized. Although he had been educated and went to school and all that, he had decided to come back home and continue working his parents' farmhouse. His sister had been easygoing, and before long we were very good friends, and she would always come to visit me whenever I wasn't at her shop learning to bake. It had been one of the days when I had been learning to bake a strawberry shortcake that Simon had walked in to ask after his sister, who had stepped out to get an ingredient we ran out of for the chocolate cake she was meant to deliver the next day. I fell in love at first sight with Simon. He had been so handsome that day, looking all cowboy with his hat, which he probably had on to prevent the sun from scorching him, and his sleeves rolled up to show his muscles gotten not from years of working out in a gym, but years of working the farm. Simon had started up a conversation with me, and I stammered through the answers, blushing until his sister had shown up. She teased me greatly about that day, even during my years of being married to her brother. Simon and I started off as friends, but I was already madly in love with him, and was just hoping he felt the same way soon. Our whole relationship had been explosive. After 1 month of being friends, Simon and I started dating, and eventually we got married within 3 months. My parents didn't show up for the wedding. Well, they couldn't, seeing I actually never mentioned them in any conversations Simon and I had. I had told him initially that I was an orphan. I don't know why I did that. Probably because I was too ashamed of my background. Within a year of being married, I got pregnant with Lily, my girl, and we were so happy. Shortly after I gave birth to Lily, I became pregnant with Jonah, and since we had originally agreed to only have 2 kids, we were happy they were born so closely. After about 3 years, the kids had started going to daycare, and I was always alone in the house. Simon's sister had offered for me to buy off her mini bakery because she had decided to move away to another place. So I had just bought it for a ridiculous amount of money, and I started off my business as a baker. I was happy. I am a mom and a wife and also a baker. I had everything going good for me, things that were supposed to make me happy, but yet I wasn't very happy. Simon was the best husband I could ever ask for. Despite his busy days at the farm, which he never impressed on me to go with him, he would still make time to check in on me at the bakery, have some cakes, and ask me about my day. He'd pick the kids from school and take them home and even cook for them on days that I had an order I had to meet up with. He never yelled at me once before, and he was a good listener. Anytime I had a rough day, he was always there to listen, and he was a gentle lover. He never did anything I did not like, treated me almost like a virgin each time we had sex, asking if I was hurt after the whole thing. He was everything I could dream of in a man, but still yet I just wasn't as happy and satisfied as I should be. I felt like there was something missing, something wrong with our marriage, and I couldn't even voice that thought out loud because Simon and the kids seemed satisfied with everything. I knew that the problem was with me and that I had to sort things out on my own. So I started going out of town to see this therapist. I wanted to work out my own unhappiness and work out what was wrong with me. After a month of going out of town to meet the therapist, Simon found out about it, and instead of being mad that I didn't tell him anything, he had asked the right questions. When, how, why I think I was unhappy, and I had no answers to those questions. Simon was really supportive. He would drive me out to town to meet my therapist, wait for me until I was done, and one time, he had even come in with me and had asked the therapist things he could do to help with my situation. The therapist, a much younger and single woman, had made googly eyes at my husband, obviously jealous that I had such a man with me and I was still unhappy. I got upset and insisted that Simon stop driving me and stay out of my way. I continued driving myself to the therapist for another 2 months, even though I still couldn't work out what was wrong with me. Eventually, I still went into town, but it hadn't been to visit my therapist again. I stopped going completely, although Simon didn't know that. I was visiting a new friend I had met. The day I met John, I had been stranded in the middle of the road. I had visited my therapist as usual, and on my way back home, my car had broken down, and I had no means of reaching Simon because my phone battery had run out. So there I was in the middle of the road, stranded, and John had appeared to save me. He knew quite a bit about cars, and he had been able to get mine to work normally, but he had asked me to take it to an expert once I was able to get to my home. I had been grateful, and he had accepted I buy him a drink whenever I came into town again, which had been a week after. Instead of going to see my therapist, I had called John, and we had met for drinks. My excuse had been because I wanted to repay him for helping me out the last time. John had been real flirty. He was easy to talk to, and he made me laugh with his witty jokes. I liked him, and when I had told him I was a baker, he had jokingly told me his birthday was coming and he would want to have a cake. I had taken it seriously, and I had brought him a cake I baked for his birthday. John had been surprised and pleased, and it somehow pleased me greatly that I was able to make him happy. The one funny thing I did whenever I got into town was remove my wedding ring. I did not want to ruin our friendship by telling him I was married with 2 kids. I liked how John flirted with me. It made me happy. It felt like what I had been missing, what was causing my unhappiness. Even Simon noticed my chippy moods, and he assumed that my therapist had finally gotten to me, and he was relieved and happy. He had even told me that I had been so snappy and angry each day for the past year, and he and the kids had had to tiptoe around me for fear of getting me upset. I felt really guilty because Simon had no idea it wasn't my therapy sessions getting at me, but another man. I felt like I was cheating, but I shrugged it off because I wasn't even sleeping with John then. So I felt I had nothing to feel guilty about. I continued my frequent visits to see John, and one day John had invited me to his place. I found it weird that he hadn't invited me before but couldn't say anything about it. We met at restaurants or someplace other than his place before that day, and I couldn't complain. I was pleased so long as I got to see him and hang out with him. It was obvious he had just moved there because the place had been filled with items that were still unpacked, and I had helped him settle in. John had then told me that he lived with his wife before and that they were going through a divorce, which was the reason he hadn't been able to invite me over to his place. I felt hurt that he never told me he was married, but then I kept quiet because I knew I had not told John anything about my own marriage either. From then on, I started visiting John's place more frequently. I lied to Simon that I had started learning in another baker's shop so I could up my skills, and he had no objections. John and I started sleeping together soon enough. The first time had happened when we played a daring game, and it had gotten rather heated. I felt so guilty that day, but I kept my turmoil inside of me because John did not know why I should be panicking. I got home that day, and Lily had been especially chatty that evening, wanting to tell me how her day went in school, but I wanted to just sit by myself and sort out my thoughts, so I had yelled at her that evening. I felt bad after yelling, but I didn't apologize. I was dealing with my guilt. But my guilt did not stop me from going to see John twice a week when we would have countless sex. I should have found it weird that John never asked why I had to travel twice a week to see him when I could just stay. But John was comfortable with our lifestyles, and he never complained about it, not even once. Eventually, I found out that John was never going through a divorce, and he was only having an affair with me. I had found out when his wife had walked in on us during one of our physical activities. She had pulled my hair and had almost beaten me up, but John had held her, so I was able to make my escape. I deleted John's number and decided to focus on my life. Luckily, John knew nothing about me except the things I told him, so he didn't know the town I traveled to his place from, or that I was married with 2 kids. I decided to face my marriage and my kids this time, determined to be happy. When Simon had asked why I stopped going to my therapist, I had told him that I didn't need a therapist to be happy anymore, and Simon had said nothing. 2 months after the whole incident, a couple had moved into our town, and they had been our next-door neighbors. The husband had turned out to be one of the clients I used to sleep with when I worked at Donald's Club. He had been one of my paying clients. I had been so shocked seeing them move into a small town like ours, especially because I knew how wealthy the man was. But apparently, his business had taken a big hit, and they had gone almost bankrupt, so all their savings had gone into paying debts, and the remaining had been used to move to a new place with a fresh start. The wife insisted on becoming my friend, despite my attempts to stay away from them. I was scared that the man would expose my past to Simon, and I wanted none of that happening. I didn't want my marriage destroyed. I love Simon and our kids so much. The man definitely recognized me, because every time he saw me, he smirked and would then turn away and continue whatever he was doing. So I went to see him one day to beg him not to expose me. I knew his wife went to town twice every week to visit her mom, who was sick and apparently in a nursing home. She had told me during one of our many chit-chats. And luckily for me, Simon had gone out of town to deliver some farm products to his customers. The kids had gone to school, so I was able to visit the man without anyone around to suspect anything. I had gone to see him to beg him not to expose me, but he had told me he missed me because I just disappeared into thin air back then, and he didn't even get a rebound. He had promised to keep my secret under the condition that I slept with him again. I had no choice but to agree, so we had had sex that night. It should have stopped there. I gave him what he wanted, and that was supposed to be it. He never even asked again for it, but I was still so scared he would blurt out knowing me to Simon, especially since he and my husband had grown so close since he came around. So I continued sleeping with him to keep his mouth shut about us. I felt guilty cheating, especially with someone so close to us, but the guilt made it kind of exciting for me. I felt like a kid knowing that candy was bad for my teeth, and yet still eating a full bar of candy every day. I continued my affair with him, and I was pleased no one knew anything about what was going on. Sometimes he would come around to my bakery, and when I had no customers, we would go around back in my changing room and have sex. But soon enough, I got tired of sneaking around like kids having drugs. I wanted to be free, especially after I had listened to his wife talk about her friend who was in an open relationship with her husband. She had told me that the husband knew most of the people she slept with, and she also knew her husband's mistresses. She had told me she was envious of them and somehow wished she and her husband could maybe open their relationship, but then she knew how insanely possessive her husband was and how big he was on staying faithful to your spouse. I had snorted inside me, knowing just what the husband was doing behind her back. But the thought of opening our relationship started to dwell in my mind. But knowing exactly who Simon was, I knew he would never agree to it. I knew getting Simon to agree would definitely alleviate the guilt I carried around all day of having an affair, so I knew I had to somehow bring up the issue. One time after our usual routine of sex, I had casually mentioned a friend that I knew, a lie, who was in an open relationship with her husband and how they were happy. Simon had frowned seriously against it and had rebuked the idea of having to cheat on me. He had told me he couldn't stand anyone who cheated and would want them out of his life as soon as he found out. That had made me really scared, knowing what I was doing could lead to a breakup in my marriage. So I never mentioned or hinted again that I wanted an open relationship. Even the man I was sleeping with had laughed at the idea, calling it ridiculous. He also couldn't have his wife cheating on him, even though he was doing the exact thing with another man's wife. I became rather unhappy dealing with my conscience all the time and trying to evade Simon finding out about my affair with our next-door neighbor. One time I got pregnant and I had panicked. Because I did not know who the father was between my husband and our next-door neighbor, I had been sleeping with both of them regularly, so there was no way to calculate just who the father was until the baby was born, and I couldn't risk it. What if the baby was born and looked exactly like our next-door neighbor, and nothing like me or my husband? I didn't even tell anyone about the baby, so I went to another town after lying to my husband that I wanted to visit a distant cousin of mine who had come into town. I went and got rid of the baby. I had some complications and bled for days, but I lied to Simon that it was my menstrual period. Days after that, Simon had found the pregnancy test kit I used when he wanted to empty out the waste, and when he had questioned me about it, I had lied that it had been a fake because I had seen my period immediately after that. Simon hadn't even exactly been convinced, but he did not argue with me, which I was grateful for. But ever since then, he started spending more time out of the house and barely touched me again. He only smiled around the kids and never really spoke to me much, except when it was necessary. He stopped his usual habits of stopping by the bakery, but I was too busy trying to cover up my tracks of having an affair to put a meaning behind his actions. Soon after that, our neighbor's wife decided to host a party to celebrate their move-in, since they couldn't exactly do that at the beginning because of how they had come. She had me help her with the cooking, and I even baked a mini cake for them. She had, of course, invited anyone who would come, and that had literally been half of the town. The party started in the evening so that those who had kids would have put them to bed and have time to hang out. The party went on smoothly, and nothing was out of place. Or should I say everything was out of place? I was just too insensitive to notice. Simon just sat there on their couch and was drinking his beer while staring into space, and I had gone to meet him giggling and a little bit tipsy. I had shared 2 glasses of champagne with the women, and since I had 0 tolerance for alcohol, I got drunk easily. Even when I worked at the club, I hardly took any drinks because I knew that those men could easily take advantage of a drunk waitress at a club, and nothing would look out of place to an onlooker. But I had been careless that evening, and I had bitten off more than I could chew. I had gone to Simon and started blurting out nonsense about how I wanted an open marriage, and it would be easy to do that with a couple that would understand our needs, and that I needed to be happy as I wasn't happy with just us. I even said that we needed to spice up our marriage. The next crazy thing I had done was pointing out to where our next-door neighbor had stood with his wife talking to someone, and I had whispered that they would be perfect to cheat with. Simon had pushed me off his legs and had stood up angrily. He had asked me if that was the man I had been cheating on him with and even aborted a baby for. Being drunk and ready to say anything that came to my head, I had nodded a yes, and everyone had gasped when they heard my response. Simon had announced right there that he wanted a divorce and he would never let me have access to our kids again. It had been the next morning before I realized exactly what I had done, and by then it was too late to take anything back. I've been emailed the divorce papers a week after he left with the kids, and another letter to tell me to evacuate the house within the week after signing the divorce papers. I cannot lose Simon and the kids. That's my whole life right there. I do not even mind the whole town hating me or whispering about me everywhere I went. They don't matter. Simon and the kids are my everything. There'd be nothing to live for if I lose them. Please, guys, help me. How do I undo what I've done? How do I get back my family again? Please. Update. Hello, Reddit. Oh, it's funny, isn't it? How life could be so perfect this moment, and then the next instance you've lost everything you've ever had. I had the perfect everything. The perfect loving husband who cared and loved me so much. The perfect kids who never stressed me and loved their mama. Everything had been perfect, really, until I went and ruined everything with my own hands. Stupid of me, right? I'm sure you guys agree. I came here knowing that I did the very wrong things, but I needed some sort of way to right my wrongs and perhaps get back what I lost. But you guys have comforted me in the opposite way by letting me know just how unworthy I am of a second chance. How stupid it is of me to think that I could ever get them back after everything I did to hurt them. How audacious. I refuse to use some of the creative words you guys used instead. You think I am to think that I could really get some pity or words of advice from you guys to get back the people I hurt so much. I know now what a stupid decision it is I made to have come here, thinking I really would get some advice. I regret everything. I've never been as alone as I am at this moment. I have no place to go or no one to talk to. I really am just an empty shell. I feel so horrible. My heart keeps hurting so much. My brain keeps going on and on like a broken recorder and reminding me just about how much hurt I caused Simon. After signing the divorce papers, I had to leave the house, so I left the town entirely because I couldn't bear to watch my family from afar without being with them. It was too much of a torture I couldn't bear. And I thought moving out of that town would at least make it better with time, but it just gets worse each day. I keep yearning for them, but knowing that I was with them and I lost that opportunity because of my lying, cheating self hurts so much more. Having to wonder how they're doing without me. If the kids miss me and ask after me, and what their father would tell them when they do ask. Do they know now that their mother was a lying and unfaithful wife to their father? Do they hate me now? Those thoughts keep me awake at night and several times my neighbors had come banging my door to let them sleep and stop my cries. I have nothing to my name. I'm just so alone. I cannot even go back to my parents after so many years of abandoning them. They probably would have forgotten they ever gave birth to me. Now I realize that this may be karma. I abandoned my parents without thinking that there may be consequences, and now the consequences are here in full force. I'll grow old without me in the picture with my kids. They probably wouldn't even remember me anymore in 10 years' time, or they probably would hate me for cheating on their dad as I did. Simon will never let me back into their lives, and to be honest, I'm too much of a coward to try. Or should I say it's not cowardice? I'm not even worthy of trying to weave my way back into their lives. They're better off without me. But I'm not better off without them. I'm alone and suffering. I'm suffering so much. It hurts so much. The future feels so blank and empty and dark. I regret everything I've done so much, and I wish so desperately that life had a do-over. I never would do all the nonsense I did. I would have been a faithful wife and a loving mother. I would never have cheated on Simon the way I did. I would have just stuck to the comfortable and happy life I had. I wouldn't have been greedy or attempted to find another form of happiness outside my marriage. Simon never gave me any reason to doubt his love, and yet I took advantage of that love he gave me. Well, I guess I found what I was looking for eventually. Doom. Now I cannot even bring myself out of the trap I dumped myself into. I hate myself so much right now. I hate everything about myself. I wish there was some way to just remove myself or detach myself from my own body. Every day I'm reminded again and again of just how much loyalty would have gone a long way in my marriage. Living every day is torture. Sometimes I just wish I could be brave enough to end everything, but I cannot. Because I know ending things will not be enough to atone for everything I did to hurt Simon and the kids. So I need to stay alive and suffer through the rest of my life and hope that at least would make up for 1/3 of the things I did. Is there a manual out there that could perhaps teach me how to go through these things? I'm sure there isn't, right? Because no manual would be enough to prepare you to deal with the aftermath of cheating and also teach you to live with the pain of losing everything you've ever loved. I want to scream. I'm losing my mind daily. It's so hard. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's me again. Yes, I know. You guys probably want not to hear from me again because you do not pity me one bit, and you do not want to hear my sob story. But this is right about the only place I could express myself, even with you guys judging. There's no other place. There's no one who wants to hear me, and there's no place for me to go except here. I got a tattoo recently, right under my wrist, and I tattooed the word cheat on it. Why? To remind myself in case I try to forget, which I cannot, but just in case I try to forget just how stupid I was and still am, in case I try to forget the horrible things I did to hurt Simon and the kids, in case I forget who exactly it is that I am, just in case I forget that I was exactly that word, a cheat. I did the tattoo to remember to suffer and to continue to suffer for everything I did. This is probably my last post here. You guys won't have to listen to my rants anymore. I still am in the hellhole I created for myself. It's been a whole year of everything never getting better. It's a lie when they say things get better with time. I'm not better with time. I'm worse. I still am stuck in that day when Simon announced our divorce publicly and decided to stay away from me and also ensure I have no access to the kids. I'm still stuck back in the time where I made the decision to cheat to be happy. I wish I had the knowledge of how it would be like now back then. I probably would have run the other way when I got the opportunities to cheat. A shame, really. I cannot turn back the hands of time. I will forever be trapped in this abyss of my own making. I will never get to be part of Simon's life or my kids' lives anymore. I only get the chance to wonder about them. Even that, I realize, is a sin. Because I could have been part of every process, but I chose the opposite path, and now I have to live with that forever. I still feel really bad and awful. My life definitely has no direction or purpose right now. I still regret as much as ever what I did to hurt my kids and Simon. I imagine if by now Simon has a woman in his life, someone he's now in love with, someone who is not me, someone who is a stand-in mother for our kids, That thought alone makes me have panic attacks. I want to know, and then I don't want to know because it will hurt too much seeing Simon laughing and holding another woman, especially knowing that I pushed him out. I'm too afraid to even go and check them from away, despite knowing they didn't move away from the house. I'm afraid to see them happy and see that they've moved on without me. That will probably kill me, even though I know they should move on without me. I just want to delude myself into believing that just a small part of them will still think about me and maybe forgive me. I hope you all don't end up making the same mistakes I made, though, because I can tell you for free that you'd end up like me, a lonely and sad divorcee without her kids. Thanks and goodbye.
You can't make this shit up. I found my husband has 4 different affairs through one of his friends. Hello, Reddit. I've been a huge fan of this platform for a while now. I've read a lot of stories and even people's craziest experiences, so I feel it is appropriate that I share my story on here. My experience is so crazy that I'm still baffled by it. I found out that my husband was cheating on me with 4 different women. Yes, 4 different women. And I never would have found out if not for one of his friends who felt that I should know. I feel so confused and disturbed. I don't even know how to confront my husband on this. I'm still pretending as if all is well. I'm hoping that by sharing my story here, I'll get some advice on what to do and also get some respite and clear my head. I know you're probably wondering how he kept the charade up without me ever knowing, and I honestly don't even have an answer to that question. Also, my husband was a very good liar, and I'm sure he never brought any of them to the house. But first, backstory. My name is Taylor, and I am a 29 female, and my husband, Justin, a 30-year-old man. We dated for 6 years and have been married for 2 years now. We live in the United States. My husband and I met in college. A friend introduced us, and we immediately hit it off. A few dates, and soon we were fully dating. Then we decided to take the next step and move in together. Of course, it wasn't easy. We had our struggles, but I honestly thought we would go the distance. Soon after dating, we decided to get married. Our wedding was absolutely beautiful, and it will always be a special day for me. Now, my husband worked from home while I worked in an office, which was very stressful but paid very well. It wasn't small, but it was no HR nightmare either. Bills were split 30-70 between us. That is, I paid 70% while he paid 30%. While chores were split 70-30, he 70, while I 30 as he was home more. We didn't have any kids, but we were planning on having some a few years down the line. Thinking back now, there were a few suspicious instances where my husband acted suspicious. But my husband was such a good liar. He easily escaped my questions, and even when I searched his device, I found nothing. About a week ago, I was about to go to work. I had a mild stomach ache, nothing serious, or so I thought. My husband was home. We talked right before I left, and he even mentioned he would stay in at home as he didn't have any plans today. I got to work, and my stomach ache only got worse. It got so bad that I got sent home to take drugs and rest. However, on getting home, I realized my husband wasn't home. I thought my husband had probably gone out to get something from the grocery store or something. I had a spare key so I could get into the house. I got in, took some meds, drank some tea, and went to bed. I woke up about 4 hours later, and my husband still wasn't back. That was when I started to get worried. I called him, but he wasn't picking up, so I called his close friend Dan. However, Dan said he hadn't heard from him either. A few hours later, my husband came back, and upon asking him where he went and why he wasn't picking up, my husband said he was at Dan's. But I immediately called him out on the lie and told him I had called Dan, and Dan said he hadn't seen him. So how could he have been at Dan's? However, my husband laughed and corrected himself and said that he meant to say Marco, that he had been at Marco's. Marco is another friend of my husband. I wanted to ask him to call Marco and put the phone on loudspeaker and ask him what they did while he was at his house. But honestly, I know Marco. He'll lie. I've never liked him. He's one of those macho alpha guys that are way too full of themselves and is a staunch supporter of the bro code. He'll definitely lie and say Justin was at his house even when he wasn't. So I decided to believe my husband and just drop the topic. However, I was still a little suspicious and decided to check my husband's phone once he went to bed. I waited till he was asleep and then went through his phone, but I found nothing. Back then, I was so glad that I had found nothing because I had been cheated on in the past, and it wasn't a pleasant experience at all. Yesterday, my husband and I, as well as our friend group, well, mostly my husband's friends, met up for dinner. It consisted of me and my husband, Dan, and his girlfriend, Marco, a female friend of ours, and 2 more of my husband's male friends. We all had dinner at the restaurant. Everyone pays for their stuff. We chatted, and then we even went to a bar afterwards. Something that stuck out, however, was a female friend telling us about how she dumped her husband of 2 months. The husband wasn't part of our friend group, and they didn't date for long, so she never introduced him to us. She said she dumped him because he had cheated on her. She then lamented jokingly that men these days weren't trustworthy. I laughed and told her my husband was trustworthy, to which my husband nodded and everybody laughed. However, I noticed that Dan scrunched up his nose when I said I trusted my husband. I didn't think too much of it, though. A few hours after my husband and I got home, however, I noticed I had a text from Dan, and he said he had something to tell me. I remembered what happened at the bar, and I asked him if it had to do with why he scrunched up his nose at the bar, and he said yes. He said he wouldn't tell me on the phone and that he would prefer we meet up somewhere, preferably tomorrow. I was a bit surprised, but agreed. Then he said not to tell my husband. I was surprised as I typically told my husband everything, but I was very curious, so I agreed. I inwardly decided afterwards that if whatever Dan told me was Dan's private business and he just needed a listening ear, I wouldn't tell my husband as I respect Dan's privacy. But if it was something about me or my husband, I would tell him. The next day I went to work as usual. Honestly, I was so curious about what Dan had to tell me. So the moment I closed from work, I rushed out to the cafe where Dan and I had planned to meet. Funny enough, Dan was already waiting for me. We ordered some coffee and snacks and then settled down. Dan seemed very nervous, and he had to take deep breaths lots of times. Of course, I waited patiently and even encouraged him to calm down as there was no rush. Dan is an anxious and nervous person, but he is the sweetest person ever. After calming down, he revealed to me that the reason he had scrunched up his nose at the bar was that he knew my husband was cheating on me with 4 different women. My first instinctual reaction was to laugh, as I honestly believed he was joking. However, when he didn't laugh along and just looked at me with a sorry and pitiful expression, that was when I knew he wasn't joking. I was stunned. Dan explained that he felt very guilty. That's why he decided to tell me. He said I was a good person and didn't deserve to be cheated on like that. He said my husband usually went to visit them when I was at work. Sometimes he lied about boys' trips to go see them. Dan shared that he and the other guys usually lied and covered for my husband. At that point, I was on the verge of tears, but I was trying my hardest not to cry to avoid causing a scene. Dan noticed and stopped talking, consoling me. I told him I was fine and asked him to please continue. Dan then told me my husband had a second phone. How? He said the second phone was what he used for communications with the girls. Dan shared a whole lot of other instances where my husband had lied to me, things I never knew. I asked if he knew where my husband kept the second phone, but he said my husband had never mentioned it. I thanked him and even insisted on paying the bill because I was so grateful he had told me everything. To think I was so happy in our marriage, I thought he was loyal. I loved him, but after hearing this now, it is as if all the love I had for him has evaporated into thin air. And all that is left is my pained heart. I asked him if he had any proof in the form of messages and voice notes. I needed them for when I would confront my husband. He happily obliged and sent me some screenshots of convos in a group chat. Dan explained that apart from our general friend group, he and the boys had a separate group chat just for them. In the screenshots, there were convos of my husband telling the boys that he was away at one of his girlfriend's houses. If I were ever to ask, they should tell me they were on a boys' trip. He said my husband would gather them and they would go somewhere and take a shit ton of photos so my husband could use them and lie that he was on a boys' trip. I was really grateful for them. Another thing I asked Dan was if the other girls never got suspicious. Dan said he didn't know much, as my husband never told them much. He had also only ever met one of the girls, and that was because the girl had become curious and started questioning my husband about his life. Dan said the girl had mentioned feeling as if Justin, my husband, was hiding her, so Justin had taken her to meet Dan. Dan also said that whenever the girls got too curious, he would just dump them. He also mentioned that Justin had once said the reason why he had married me was because I was his favorite. Dan told me a few other things after this, but these were the main ones. And after that, the convo ended, and I went home. The moment I got home, my husband immediately noticed my mood and asked me what was wrong. He also noticed I wasn't home on time today, but I deflected and told him I had a headache. I'm in bed right now, and I don't know what to do. 8 years of my life wasted with a serial cheater. I'm thinking of waiting until he sleeps so I can search for the other phone. I'll update on what I find. Thanks for listening. **update. **. Hi guys. You probably remember me as the girl who found out her husband had 4 different affair partners. This post blew up way more than I expected. I have gotten a lot of requests for updates and also a lot of supportive messages. Thank you to everyone who has sent a message asking about my well-being and also giving me advice on how to move forward. As for asking for an update, so I guess here's one. Crazy things have happened. First of all, I no longer live with my husband, or rather soon-to-be husband. How did I get there? Let me explain. Remember, I said I was going to wait and search for my husband's other phone, and that's what I did. I waited until my husband went to bed. He's a fast sleeper, so that was relatively easy. After he had fallen asleep, I waited an hour extra just to make sure he was fully asleep. Then I started searching for the phone. It wasn't easy, I won't lie to you. My husband had hidden them where I would never think to find. I searched his clothes, the closet, everything, and I couldn't find them. I don't know what attracted my eyes to the shoeboxes. My husband loves sneakers, and he loves to keep them in boxes. I decided to search the boxes on a whim, because I had searched almost everything in the room and I couldn't find them. At that point, I was thinking that maybe they were in some other room. Maybe he had hidden them somewhere in the living room or maybe even the toilet, but I decided to check the boxes. I searched a lot of them, but they weren't there as my husband owns a sizable amount of sneakers. However, I finally found it in one of the sneaker boxes right under the sneaker. It was switched off, of course. I plugged it in and switched it on. It was charged. Funny enough, it didn't even have a password. And on it, I found so many things. It was crazy. I found out about the girls. There were 4, and he was even chatting up a 5th one, but it was obvious he and the girl hadn't gone far. They were still getting to know each other. There were so many things. So many of them, I was stunned. I was so shocked I started to cry. I cried for a while, though I did it silently so as not to wake up my husband. I went through the phone and they were just so much. He had been cheating on me for a long time, and not just with these 4, there were a lot of other people, but I'm guessing these 4 were the most recent ones. I took a lot of the screenshots, and I'm not even joking, I mean a lot, and sent them all to my phone. Then I collected all the numbers of the 4 girls because I decided inwardly that after I was done confronting my husband, I would send them evidence. Because from the messages they are sent to my husband, it was obvious they didn't even know he was married. One hilarious thing I noticed in the text messages was with the way my husband spoke to them. It was obvious he had implied to them that he was some kind of secret agent, and that was why he had to keep his life private from them, and they believed him. It was hilarious. Another thing I noticed that I couldn't help but be surprised by was that these girls didn't really know much about my husband. I mean, who in this day and age dates someone without knowing a thing about them? But hey, I didn't want to be too judgmental. I knew my husband could be pretty charming when he wanted to be, and these girls seemed a bit naive. Honestly, I felt sorry for them falling for my husband's lies. Another I noticed while scrolling through the phone, I stumbled upon a super recent chat between my husband and one of the girls. Glancing at the date, it hit me. They'd been messaging this very afternoon while I was slogging away at work. That must be his prime phone time. In the messages, my husband casually dropped plans to meet up with the girl the next day, which happened to be tomorrow. I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony because that tomorrow was the day I would definitely confront him and expose all his lies. Anyway, I carefully put the phone back exactly where he had stashed it and headed back to bed. I decided to deal with this and confront him the next day. Before hitting the hay, I fired off a quick text to my boss, who is a night owl LOL, giving her the lowdown on the situation. We're pretty tight, so I spilled the beans and asked for tomorrow off. No surprises there. She was totally on board and granted me the day to deal with my issues. The next day, not having to hustle for work, I kicked back and chilled at home. No rushing, no prep stress, just a laid-back morning. My husband picked up on it and asked why I wasn't going to work. I just told him no, and I could see a bit of worry in his eyes. He couldn't resist asking what's up with the sudden change. I made up a story about feeling distant and wanting some quality time together, blaming my crazy work hours. He looked surprised, trying to reassure me, but feeling something was off, I dug deeper. I pointed out his subdued response and, grabbing the moment, asked him straight up if he was surprised because he couldn't go see Sandra, one of the girls but not her real name. When I dropped that bomb, you could hear a pin drop. The silence was that intense. My husband, caught off guard, tried to smooth things over with a laugh. I wasn't buying it, though. I interrupted him. He demanded to know who this Sandra was, but no way was I falling for his act. I told him straight up not to act surprised because I knew he was cheating, and not just with one but 4 other girls. His face, pure shock. The moment those words left my mouth, it felt like a ton of bricks lifted off my shoulders. I'd known for a while, and now it was out there. My calm turned into anger. I went off, yelling at him, asking how he could do this. He stood there, lost for words, trying to say sorry, but I wasn't having any of it. Tears started flowing as the weight of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. My husband had been cheating with 4 different women. I was full-on crying now. All the strength I'd been showing before seemed to crumble, and I felt completely overwhelmed. It was like the shoe I'd put up had finally dropped. He tried to console me, but I couldn't handle it. I pushed him away, telling him to stay far from me. How could he? How do you do that to someone? He attempted to defend himself, saying he loved me and it was a mistake. I shot back, saying, "You don't make that kind of mistake. How do you mess up and cheat with 4 people? Not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 people." To make matters worse, this wasn't even his first rodeo. He was just unlucky enough to get caught this time. He'd been cheating on me for a long stretch, and I was oblivious to it all. Who knows how many women he'd been with? I started freaking out, thinking about whether he might have exposed me to STDs or who knows what. I had been loyal to him, and all the while he was out there cheating. I was overwhelmed with disgust, heartbreak, and a deep sense of sadness. Being near him felt unbearable. I didn't want to see his face. So, without hesitation, I headed straight to our room while he continued pleading and attempting to spin the usual cheater excuses. The seduction, the mistake, the please forgive me. I shut it all out. Ignoring his pleas, I grabbed a small bag, threw in a few essentials, and left as he desperately clung to me. I warned him to stay away, threatening to involve the police if he didn't. I needed to get away, so I headed to my brother's place. I didn't have the strength to explain the whole ordeal, but thankfully my brother sensed the gravity of the situation and didn't press. He did his best to make me comfortable, ordered some food, but I had no appetite. I just crashed into bed, seeking solace in a long nap. When I woke up from the nap, I checked my phone and found it flooded with messages, not just from my husband, but also from his parents. I don't know what tale he spun for them, but it seemed like he painted me as the villain. They were all sending messages, blaming me, saying it was my fault, and it wasn't just his parents. Even our friend group joined in. It was disheartening, especially from friends who knew he was cheating. The only person who didn't join the blame game was Dan. He messaged, expressing his sympathy for what I was going through and promised to explain the real story to everyone. I got back to Dan, thanking him and saying he's a real friend. Assured him not to worry, I'd handle the mess. Then, feeling like turning the tables, I made a WhatsApp group. Tossed in my folks, my husband's folks, my siblings. Even added my brother who was in the living room watching TV, my husband's siblings, my husband, all our friends, and of course the 4 girls he'd been cheating with. In the group chat, I called out those blaming me without knowing the facts, tossed in nearly all the screenshots to spill the truth, didn't hold back on my husband, declared we were heading for divorce, even called my husband's parents out for blindly supporting their son. After saying my piece, I left the group chat, leaving them to face the truth they'd been ignoring. After sending that group chat message, my phone blew up with messages. Friends reached out, apologizing and claiming they didn't buy into what happened. I didn't bother replying because, honestly, they seemed like fake friends. Some of them knew my husband was cheating and never let me in on it. I decided then and there that they were getting cut out of my life. My husband's parents and siblings tried calling, but I refused to pick up. Soon after, Messages rolled in, this time less aggressive. They were asking me to forgive my husband, playing the everybody makes mistakes card. Seriously? Now they want me to forgive him? That was a no-go. Meanwhile, my husband was on a roller coaster of emotions, from begging and pleading to getting angry and hurling insults. He cursed at me, claimed I was crazy and delusional, and even said he only stayed married to me out of pity. According to him, I should be grateful he picked me. I just ignored his craziness. However, knowing my husband's penchant for craziness and petty actions, I made it clear that he'd better not mess with any of my stuff at the apartment. I warned him that if he did, I wouldn't hesitate to drag him to small claims court. I informed him I'd swing by sometime during the week to gather the rest of my belongings. He didn't bother responding to my message, probably fuming with anger. In the living room, I guess my brother finally glanced at his phone, probably after binge-watching TV. He walked into the room, looking bewildered. Seeing my expression, he understood I wasn't ready to talk about it. Instead, he suggested we go out that night to distract me from everything. My brother is the absolute best, and I'm grateful to have him. We ended up at a karaoke joint, and it turned into a night of laughter and fun. It was exactly what I needed to take my mind off things. A few days later, I was all set to grab my stuff from the apartment. Even though both our names were on the lease, I had no intention of sticking around. I figured my husband wouldn't handle the rent solo and would likely end up crashing at his parents' place. Honestly, not my problem. I shot him a message the day before, giving him a heads up about my visit. Since I still had the spare keys, I told him he could either bounce to spare me the awkwardness or just steer clear while I packed up my things. Seems like he opted for the stubborn route. I brought my brother along just in case my husband tried any nonsense. He looked all aggressive and mad when he saw my brother, so I knew he would have kicked up a fuss if my brother hadn't been there. While my husband kept on begging me to stay, apologizing and promising it wouldn't happen again, I just ignored him. My brother gave him a glare like he was invisible dust. Then my husband started bringing up the lease, asking how he'd afford the apartment. I bluntly told him that was absolutely none of my business. He looked furious, but I knew he wouldn't dare pull anything with my brother around. That gave me some comfort. We wrapped up packing, and as I was leaving, I made it crystal clear to my husband that we were heading for divorce. I mentioned getting my lawyer to whip up the divorce papers, which I'd be sending his way. I suggested he get some legal advice too, and then I walked out with my brother. That was just a few days ago, and honestly, I'm doing pretty darn well. My brother's been a champ at distracting me, and there are times I forget my husband even exists. The divorce papers will be ready soon, and I can't wait to send them to my husband, or should I say ex-husband. And that's a wrap, and I truly appreciate all the support and messages I've received. Thank you, everyone. I genuinely feel great and better. As a token of gratitude, I treated Dan to dinner again for cluing me in on the antics of my serial cheater ex-husband. Thanks a bunch. To anyone out there cheating on their partner, you seriously suck. Big time. Hopefully your partner catches on one day. Better yet, do the right thing and come clean now.